It was the kind of summer morning that made the air smell like honey and fresh grass. I hadn't been back to my grandfather's secluded cabin in years. Life had pulled me into many directions: school, work, obligations, but for some reason. That morning, I felt an unshakable urge to return. The cabin, nestled at the edge of a sprawling forest, was just as I remembered it: weathered wooden walls, a chimney puffing lazy smoke, and a garden that seemed to grow in every direction. Once I stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. The forest behind the cabin was alive with bird calls, rustling leaves, and the faint hum of insects. Grandpa always said the forest held secrets, and for the first time in years, I believed him. "Grandpa," I called as I entered the cabin. The familiar scent of old books, pine, and metal greeted me. I hadn't been in here in so long that the dust seemed almost comforting. But then I noticed movement from the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was a bird, or maybe one of Grandpa's mechanical gadgets. But then I saw it, a tiny creature, trembling slightly, with scales that glittered like molten gemstones. His wings were folded neatly against his back, too small yet perfectly formed. His eyes, white and shimmering with curiosity and fear, met mine. I froze, my mouth dry. What is that?" Grandpa appeared behind me, adjusting his spectacles. He blinked, then smiled. "Oh, you've met him." "Met who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That," he said, gesturing toward the tiny dragon, "is a baby dragon, youngest I've ever seen. Came to me barely bigger than a squirrel. I've been helping him grow, feeding him, keeping him safe." I couldn't believe it. A dragon, right here, in my grandfather's cabin. "You raised him?" Grandpa nodded. "Found him injured in the northern cliffs. Wouldn't have survived on his own. Dragons are strong, clever creatures, but babies, they need help. And apparently, he chose me." The little dragon let out a soft trill and crawled toward me. His scales caught the sunlight streaming through the window, a shimmering rainbow of colors. I held out my hand hesitantly, and he clambered onto my palm, trusting me immediately. It was the most surreal feeling, holding a creature so fragile yet brimming with untapped power. Grandpa watched me with an expression I didn't understand. "Be careful. Dragons, even tiny ones, are more aware than you think, and humans, well, you're more capable than you know. He'll teach you as much as you teach him." I spent hours with him that day, naming him, feeding him, learning his quirks. His tiny claws clicked softly on the wooden table as he explored, sniffed, and occasionally nipped playfully. Every trill, every flutter of his wings felt like a conversation. Somehow, in those small sounds, I felt him communicating not just hunger or discomfort, but curiosity, excitement, even a spark of mischief. Days turned into weeks, and my routine transformed. I would wake early to feed him, carefully measuring portions of specially prepared food Grandpa taught me to make. I would take him outside, letting him practice fluttering in the morning sun. His wings, once fragile, grew stronger. His scales deepened in color, reflecting the sunlight like polished opal, and in every heartbeat, in every trill, I felt a growing bond that transcended species, a silent understanding that our lives were now intertwined. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in fiery oranges and purples, I found him sitting on my shoulder, tiny claws digging gently into my shirt. He looked out toward the forest with wide, shining eyes, and I realized he trusted me completely, and in return, I trusted him with a part of my life I had never shared with anyone before. Grandpa appeared behind me again, leaning on his cane. "You've done well," he said softly. "Not everyone earns the trust of a dragon. Remember, he's more than a pet, he's a companion, a friend, and in his own way, a teacher. That night, as I tucked him into a makeshift nest near the fireplace, I understood. My life had changed. It wouldn't just be about school, work, or responsibilities anymore. Somewhere along the way, in a quiet cabin on the edge of a forest, a tiny baby dragon had walked into my life, and everything I thought I knew about courage, loyalty, and wonder had been turned upside down, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was only the beginning. The days after my first encounter with Orion, the tiny baby dragon, passed in a blur of wonder and discovery. Each morning I woke with anticipation, rushing to his nest beside the fireplace to see what new quirks or talents he had developed. Overnight and every morning, he surprised me. At first, he could barely lift himself from the nest. His tiny wings, iridescent and fragile, twitched nervously whenever he attempted to flutter. But he had determination. I had seen stubbornness in humans, but Orion's resolve was something else entirely pure, unyielding, and infinitely inspiring. Grandpa had given me careful instructions: the diet, the exercise, the ways to stimulate. His mind, dragons, even tiny ones, were far smarter than they seemed. Don't just feed him, Grandpa had said. Teach him. Let him solve problems. Let him discover the world, and he'll repay you in ways you can't imagine. So I did. I built tiny obstacle courses in the garden, using sticks, ropes, and old wooden boxes. Orion would attempt to navigate them, often toppling over, but always getting up again, his wings catching sunlight as he scrambled back to try once more. I spent hours demonstrating, showing him the movements, guiding him gently, praising his smallest successes, and slowly he began to respond. The first time he managed a short glide from the edge of the porch to the top of the garden fence, my heart leapt. His wings stretched fully, catching the wind, his scales glittering like jewels. In the morning sun, he landed with perfect balance, his tiny claws digging into the wood, and looked at me with what I could only interpret as pride. But it wasn't just physical lessons. Orion was learning language in his own way. Trills, clicks, and soft chirps became our secret communication. Sometimes I would hum or whistle, and he would respond with a trill that seemed to carry meaning. Other times, he would tap patterns with his claws or flap his wings rhythmically, as if testing me, gauging my response. One afternoon, while I was organizing some old books in the cabin, he found a cracked wooden box in the corner. Curiosity sparked in his eyes, and he nudged it with his snout. When it fell open, it revealed tiny fragments of what looked like crystal and metal. I picked one up, and Grandpa's voice echoed in my memory. Dragons are drawn to unusual things, objects that shine, objects that hum, sometimes even broken things. They see potential where we see trash. Orion chirped excitedly and began dragging pieces across the floor, ranging them with surprising precision. I realized he wasn't just playing, he was creating, experimenting, learning patterns. That small dragon, barely bigger than a loaf of bread, was displaying creativity I had never seen in any animal before. Days turned into weeks, and his growth was astonishing. His wings grew stronger, the iridescence of his scales deepened, and his personality bloomed. He became protective of me, curling up beside me whenever I sat on the porch, or letting out tiny warning trills whenever he sensed a stranger or a sudden noise in the forest. And I realized something important. I wasn't just raising him, he was teaching me, too. Patience, empathy, and understanding came naturally when dealing with such a creature. One evening, As the sky blushed with the last streaks of sunset, Orion attempted his first real flight outside the garden. I held my breath as he climbed into the air, wings beating rapidly, struggling to maintain balance. He wobbled, spun, and nearly toppled into the bushes, but somehow, with a final burst, he soared above the treetops for a few glorious seconds. I could hear Grandpa chuckling behind me, you see. He said softly, "Humans have this stubborn bravery. They try and try again. No matter how impossible it seems, that's what he sees in you. That's why he trusts you." I smiled down at Orion, who had landed gracefully back on the porch. Panting lightly, wings folded neatly, he looked at me with those wide, sparkling eyes, as if saying, "Thank you." That night, I sat by the fireplace, stroking his tiny back as he slept. I realized that this little dragon, this baby I had found and nurtured, was no longer just an animal. He was a companion, a friend, a confidant, and as the stars glittered outside the cabin window, I felt a thrilling certainty. Life with Orion was going to be extraordinary, filled with adventures, discoveries, and perhaps even dangers I couldn't yet imagine. Because in the heart of the forest, with the wind whispering through the trees, a tiny dragon had arrived, and he had changed everything. By the time Orion had reached a few months old, he had grown considerably, not huge, but strong, agile, and endlessly curious. His scales shimmered like polished gemstones, reflecting every streak of sunlight that filtered through the cabin's windows. The garden had become his playground, his training ground, and in a way, it had become mine too. I had learned to watch him, anticipate his movements, and communicate without words. Our bond had deepened beyond anything I had expected. One morning, Grandpa suggested we take Orion a little further from the cabin. "He's ready," he said, his eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. "He needs to explore beyond the garden. The forest is vast, full of challenges and lessons. But stay close. The forest isn't as forgiving as the garden." I felt a shiver of excitement and apprehension. I had spent weeks carefully raising him, but venturing into the wild meant unpredictability. I could see Orion's tiny wings twitch in anticipation, his eyes sparkling with eagerness. We stepped onto the forest path, sunlight filtering through the dense canopy above, casting shifting patterns on the ground. Orion's claws clicked on the rough path as he moved ahead, occasionally hopping from one fallen log to another, testing his balance, stretching his wings. It was mesmerizing to watch how something so small could move with such purpose and grace. Then, without warning, a rustling came from the bushes. Orion froze, his tail twitching nervously. Out from the shadows emerged a creature I had never seen, a small, fox-like being with iridescent fur that glimmered in shades of green and blue. Its eyes, bright and inquisitive, locked onto Orion. Orion hissed softly, a protective, warning trill that I had never heard before. The creature hesitated, circling cautiously. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't retreating either. I held my breath, unsure how the encounter would unfold, and then something extraordinary happened. Orion stepped forward, wings slightly spread, and chirped in a melodic pattern. The fox-like creature tilted its head, seemingly understanding, and slowly approached. They sniffed, exchanged small sounds, and within minutes, a cautious friendship formed. I was stunned. My little dragon, barely larger than my forearm, had negotiated peace with a wild forest creature using nothing but instinct, intelligence, and courage. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Humans have this stubborn bravery. Orion recognizes it, but he also learns from it just as you learn from him. We continue deeper into the forest, navigating streams, fallen trees, and rocky patches. Orion practiced flying higher and farther, gliding from tree to tree, sometimes nearly losing balance but always recovering. I learned to trust his instincts. He began taking the lead. Exploring paths I would have hesitated to tread suddenly. A low rumble shook the forest floor. The trees trembled, leaves falling round us. Orion's ears twitched, and he flapped his wings nervously. From a distance, I saw it, a massive shadow moving between the trees. A creature far larger than anything Orion or I had encountered scaled. Serpentine, with glowing amber eyes. My heart pounded. I froze. Grandpa had warned me about forest dangers, but nothing could have prepared me for this. Orion, despite his size, let out a series of confident trills, puffing himself up. He wasn't just small or fragile anymore. He was alert, brave, and ready. The large creature paused, seemingly assessing the situation, and then, to my amazement, it slowly retreated. Intimidated by the tiny dragon's boldness, I knelt down, my hands trembling, and whispered to Orion. "You're amazing. You really are," he chirped softly, brushing against my arm, wings quivering in excitement. That day, I realized just how far we had come. This wasn't just care and training, it was partnership. He had grown stronger, smarter, and fearless. And he had taught me that courage isn't measured by size or age, it's measured by heart. As the sun dipped behind the treetops, painting the forest in oranges and purples. We made our way back to the cabin. Orion clung to my shoulder, tired but exhilarated, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I couldn't stop smiling, knowing that our bond had deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual, watching. Orion sleep curled up beside the fireplace. His chest rose and fell in steady breaths, and I traced my fingers over the shimmer of his scales. In my mind, I ran through the day's events, the forest, the fox-like creature, the giant shadow. Each moment was a lesson, each challenge an opportunity. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Life with Orion was only going to get bigger, stranger, and more incredible. The world was vast, full of mysteries, and we had only just begun to explore it. The tiny baby dragon I had found months ago was no longer just a companion. He was a partner, a teacher, and a friend, and together we would face everything the universe had in store. Because in a quiet cabin at the edge of a sprawling forest, a small dragon had grown stronger, and a human had learned that courage, curiosity, and compassion could create the most extraordinary adventures. The following morning, the forest seemed alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. Sunlight pierced through the dense canopy, illuminating patches of moss and casting long shadows across the forest floor. Birds called overhead, and the scent of damp earth and wildflowers hung heavy in the air. I could feel the anticipation buzzing in Orion's tiny frame. He perched on my shoulder, wings twitching, eyes alert. Today felt different. Grandpa had suggested a new route deeper into the forest, a path that wound through ancient trees, across narrow streams, and past hidden glades that few humans had ever seen. He needs to experience the world fully. Grandpa had said, there are lessons hidden in every corner: strength, caution, curiosity, and sometimes danger. Orion and I stepped carefully along the trail. Every sound seemed amplified: the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant rustle of unknown creatures, the whisper of wind through the branches. Orion chirped softly, nudging my ear as if to remind me to stay attentive. I laughed quietly, realizing just how much he had become my guide, as well as my companion. As we moved further in, we discovered a small clearing bathed in golden sunlight. In the center was a shimmering pond, its surface so still it reflected the trees and sky like a flawless mirror. Orion flitted down, dipping a claw into the water, causing gentle ripples. He looked at me, eyes wide with curiosity. Before glancing back at the forest's edge, suddenly, the tranquility was broken by a loud, crashing sound, a tree falling somewhere nearby. Shaking the earth beneath us, Orion's wings twitched nervously, but instead of retreating, he crouched low, ready to spring into action. Out of the shadows emerged a group of creatures I hadn't seen before, large, wolf-like beings with fur that shimmered in shades of silver and grey. They moved with incredible speed, circling the clearing, eyes fixed on Orion. My heart raced. I froze, unsure how to react, but Orion, small as he was, puffed himself up. Letting out a series of sharp trills and clicks, I could see the determination in his tiny eyes. He wasn't going to back down. To my amazement, the wolf-like creatures paused. They sniffed the air, assessing, and then, in a surprising display of intelligence, one of them stepped forward. It let out a soft growl, and Orion responded with a melodic trill. Spreading his wings wide to appear larger, the standoff lasted for what felt like minutes, but to me it was a lesson in courage, communication, and trust. Eventually, the creatures backed away, disappearing into the forest's shadows. Orion hopped back onto my shoulder, wings fluttering slightly from exertion. I laughed nervously, running my fingers through his tiny, glimmering scales. "You're incredible," I whispered. He chirped softly in response, as if acknowledging the compliment. We continued our journey, moving past the pond and into denser sections of the forest. The path narrowed, vines hanging low, roots twisting beneath our feet. Orion explored ahead, occasionally flitting between branches or landing on rocks to investigate unfamiliar scents. I began to notice how much he had grown, not just in size, but in confidence. The timid, trembling creature I had found months ago was now bold, aware, and fiercely protective. As we reached the ridge overlooking a vast valley, Orion perched on a branch, gazing down with fascination. The valley was unlike anything I had imagined. Rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, rivers that sparkled in the sun, and in the distance, a faint glimmer of what might have been ruins or ancient structures. My mind raced with possibilities. The forest wasn't just home. It was a world full of secrets, waiting to be discovered. "Are you ready for what comes next?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. Orion tilted his head, trilling softly, wings flaring in anticipation. I realized then that this tiny dragon had become more than a companion. He was my partner in exploration, my teacher, and my guide into the unknown. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley, we made camp in a small glade. Orion nestled in a soft patch of moss beside me, eyes half closed but still alert. I traced my fingers along his wings, marveling at how much he had grown, how far we had come together. That night, as stars sparkled overhead and the forest hummed with life, I understood a truth that had become undeniable. The journey with Orion had only just begun. The baby dragon who had once been frail and timid was now strong, intelligent, and brave, and I, a human who had stumbled upon him by chance, had discovered courage, patience, and an unbreakable bond that would guide us through whatever the forest or the world threw our way. Tomorrow promised new challenges, new discoveries, and perhaps a glimpse of the mysteries hidden deep within the heart of the forest. And I knew, with complete certainty, that we would face them together. The next morning, a pale mist clung to the forest floor, curling round tree trunks and drifting across the narrow paths. Orion perched on my shoulder, his wings twitching nervously. Something in the air felt different, a tension I hadn't noticed before. The forest, alive as it always was, seemed quieter somehow, as if holding its breath. Grandpa had warned me about the deeper sections of the forest. "There are places where even dragons hesitate," he said, you'll know. Then by the shadows, the way a wind moves differently, the subtle hum of unseen life. I had thought he was exaggerating, but now, stepping into the thickening mist, I understood. Our path led us to a hidden valley. Nearly enclosed by jagged cliffs, the air was heavy, damp, and filled with a low, resonant vibration as we entered. I noticed strange symbols etched into the rock's ancient carvings, worn by centuries of wind and rain. Orion's tiny claws clicked against the stone as he explored, wings partially unfurled, eyes scanning every corner. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the valley. I stumbled, my heart pounding. As a massive shadow moved across the mist, a colossal creature emerged, its scales dark as obsidian, eyes glowing a fierce amber. This was no ordinary forest beast. Its massive wings created gusts that knocked leaves from the trees, and its claws dug deep into the earth. Orion let out a sharp trill. Puffing himself up despite his small size, I froze, unsure how to protect him or myself. But then something remarkable happened. The tiny dragon, who had grown from a fragile, trembling hatchling into a confident, intelligent creature, faced the massive beast without fear. He chirped and clicked in a series of patterns, wings flaring wide. To my amazement, the colossal creature hesitated. Its glowing eyes fixed on Orion, the two dragons regarded each other. A silent understanding passing between them. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and electric, as if the valley itself were holding its breath. And then the impossible happened. The giant creature bowed its massive head slightly, releasing a low, rumbling hum that resonated through the valley. Orion trilled back, circling the smaller creature in a display of confidence and mutual respect. My jaw dropped. My little dragon had just asserted himself in front of a being far beyond his size, and had done so with intelligence, bravery, and dignity. I approached cautiously, hands raised, and whispered, "You're incredible." Orion chirped softly, brushing against my hand as if acknowledging the praise. For a moment, I felt tears prick my eyes. This tiny being, who had once been so helpless, was now a creature of strength and courage, and he had allowed me to be part of it. The valley wasn't just a place of danger, it was a place of growth, trust, and discovery. As the mist began to lift, I realized that every lesson we had learned together, flight practice, problem solving, facing wild creatures, had prepared us for this moment. Orion had transformed, but so had I. I had learned patience, empathy, courage, and the profound impact of trust between species. As we made our way back toward the forest edge, the sun breaking through the mist in golden rays, I glanced at Orion. He perched proudly on my shoulder, tiny wings catching the sunlight, scales glittering like jewels. The bond between us had deepened beyond words. He wasn't just a dragon I had raised. He was my partner, my friend, and in many ways, my teacher. That night, as I sat by the cabin fireplace, Orion cold beside me, I reflected on everything that had happened. From the moment I found him, trembling and fragile, to now, fearless and intelligent. We had grown together, and though the valley had tested us, it had also shown us what we were capable of. I realized, with a thrill I could hardly contain, that this was only the beginning. The forest, the world beyond, even the stars above held mysteries that Orion and I would face together, and whatever challenges awaited, we would meet them side by side, human and dragon, united by trust, courage, and an unbreakable bond. Because sometimes the smallest creatures hold the greatest power, and the smallest acts of care can change everything. And in my life, that tiny dragon had done just that. Weeks had passed since our venture into the hidden valley. Orion had grown bigger, stronger, and more confident with each day. He had mastered gliding long distances, could catch small objects midair, and his trills and chirps had developed into a sophisticated language we both seemed to understand intuitively. I often marveled at how far we'd come from the trembling, fragile creature I had discovered in Grandpa's cabin to the fearless dragon who now perched proudly on my shoulder. One morning, Grandpa approached me with a serious expression. "It's time," he said, handing me a small, worn map. "Orion is ready for the Great Sky Trial. It's a challenge designed to test Dragon's agility, intelligence, and courage. But it's not just about him, he'll need you, too. This is where the bond you've built will be tested in ways you haven't imagined." I studied the map. It depicted a vast section of the forest I had never seen, crisscrossed with cliffs, rivers, and towering treetops. Small symbols indicated obstacles wind, tunnels, rocky outcrops, even shadowed ravines. The trial wasn't just a test of flight. It was a journey through a gauntlet of challenges. Orion seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. He chirped softly, brushing against my hand, wings fluttering. "We've got this, buddy," I whispered. Together, we set out at first light. The forest bathed in golden hues. Orion led the way, scanning the path, wings partially extended. Our first challenge came quickly. A narrow gorge, with winds gusting unpredictably between the cliffs. Orion hovered near the edge, testing the currents. Before taking a bold leap across, I followed, heart pounding, gripping a sturdy branch for support. His tiny wings carried him effortlessly. And for the first time, I realized the full extent of his skill. Next came a dense thicket of thorned vines, twisting and sharp. Orion navigated it with astonishing precision, using a combination of flight and careful clawing. I followed, cutting branches cautiously, but often found myself relying on his instincts. When a sudden rustle indicated a hidden creature of forest, serpent, long and slender, Orion sprang forward, puffing himself up and letting out a commanding trill. The serpent froze, then slithered away. Intimidated, I couldn't help but laugh nervously. My little dragon was commanding fear, yet he was barely larger than my forearm. The final obstacle loomed ahead, a steep cliff that opened to a wide valley. The winds howled, swirling unpredictably, and the gap below seemed bottomless. Grandpa's voice echoed in my memory. "The last trial tests courage, trust, and partnership. You must act as one." Orion hovered at the edge, wings stretched, eyes locking with mine. We both knew we had to leap together. I took a deep breath, heart hammering, and jumped. Orion flapped his wings fiercely, lifting both of us into the air. The winds tossed us round, but we moved as a single unit, human and dragon, instinctively coordinated. My arms held him securely, and he guided our flight, adjusting midair with precise movements. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time seemed irrelevant as we soared across the valley. My chest ached from fear and exhilaration, but Orion's trills and confident wing beats reassured me. Then, finally, we landed on a narrow plateau across the chasm. I stumbled but caught my balance, looking down at the dizzying drop. Orion chirped triumphantly, wings folding neatly, eyes gleaming with pride. I laughed aloud, relief washing over me. "We did it," I whispered. Orion nudged my hand, trilling softly. I realized then that the Great Sky Trial wasn't about physical skill alone. It was about trust, partnership, and the bond we had nurtured since the day I first found him. Daughters. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades. We rested on the plateau, Orion curled against me, breathing steady and calm. I ran my fingers through his shimmering scales, reflecting on the journey so far, from a helpless, injured baby to a confident, intelligent dragon. He had grown in every way imaginable, and I had grown to braver, more patient, and deeply aware of the power of connection. That night, under a blanket of stars, I whispered promises to Iran that we would explore the world, face whatever challenges came our way, and discover the secrets hidden beyond the forests and valleys. He chirped in response, his small wings twitching. Somehow, I understood. This was only the beginning. Our adventures, the lessons, and the bond we had built would shape not just our lives, but the world around us. And in that quiet, starlit moment, I knew without a doubt Orion and I were ready for whatever came next together. The forest was quieter than usual that morning. A soft mist clung to the trees, and the early sunlight filtered through the leaves in pale, golden beams. Orion perched on my shoulder, wings gently twitching, eyes scanning the horizon. After the great sky trial, both of us had changed. He had grown stronger, wiser, and far more confident, and I had learned lessons I never could have imagined, lessons about trust, courage, and the bond that could exist between a human and a dragon. Grandpa watched us from the cabin porch, his gaze distant, almost reflective. "You've done well," he said softly. "You've trained him, protected him, and learned from him. But now, it's time for the next step. There's a world beyond these forests, filled with mysteries and challenges, a world where humans and dragons can make a difference together." I nodded, feeling a thrill run through me. Orion chirped softly, brushing against my cheek, as if acknowledging that he was ready. Together, we had faced dangers, wild creatures, and the tests of the great sky trial. We had grown stronger, and now the universe itself seemed to be calling. We packed only what we needed: a few provisions, a sturdy rope, and Grandpa's old satchel filled with maps and notes. Orion flapped his wings gently as we stepped onto the forest path, moving forward with a confidence I hadn't seen in the timid little dragon I had first discovered months ago. As we walked deeper into the forest, I noticed how every sound and movement had meaning now. The rustle of leaves, the distant calls of creatures, the shifting shadows, all of it was part of the tapestry of life, and Orion seemed to understand it all instinctively. At one point, he leapt ahead, fluttering over a shallow stream, and I followed, marveling at how much I had come to rely on his guidance. Hours passed, and we reached the edge of a vast cliff overlooking a sprawling valley. The wind howled, carrying the scent of wildflowers, rivers, and distant mountains below. The river sparkled like silver, winding through the valley and disappearing into the mist. Orion perched on a rock near the edge, wings outstretched, eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is it, buddy," I whispered. "Our new adventure begins here." He chirped in response, flapping his wings once, twice, then taking off into the sky. I watched him soar, feeling a mixture of awe and pride. He had grown from a fragile, trembling baby dragon into a fearless, intelligent creature capable of facing the unknown. And I knew, in that moment, that he had changed me, to taught me courage, patience, and the power of connection. Taking a deep breath, I climbed onto a sturdy boulder and leapt, letting Orion guide my descent through the wind currents. The thrill of flight, the rush of air, and the trust between us were intoxicating. We moved as one, human and dragon, partners in a world full of mysteries waiting to be discovered. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow across the valley, we landed together on a small plateau. Orion curled against me, breathing softly, wings folding neatly. I ran my fingers through his scales, marveling at the shimmer of every color reflecting the sunset. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes the smallest creatures hold the greatest power, and the smallest acts of care can change everything. I realized then that this wasn't just about raising a dragon. It was about learning to see the world differently, to embrace courage, and to understand the strength of partnership. Orion and I were no longer just human and dragon, we were explorers, friends, and a team ready to face whatever the universe had in store. And as the stars began to sparkle overhead, I whispered to Orion, "Tomorrow, the adventure continues. Together, we can face anything." He chirped softly, nuzzling my shoulder, and for the first time since I found him, I felt the full weight of what our journey truly meant, the start of a lifetime of exploration, discovery, and wonder, because, in the heart of the forest, at the edge of the world as I knew it, a tiny baby dragon had changed everything, and together, we were ready to step into a future full of endless possibilities. The morning sun filtered through the trees with a soft, golden glow, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Orion perched on my shoulder, wings twitching with anticipation. After our great sky trial and the adventures in the Hidden Valley, the world had begun to feel much bigger and full of mysteries waiting to be discovered. Grandpa had left a note beside the fireplace. "There are places even I have not seen. Beyond the cliffs lies a secret that will test both your courage and his wisdom. Trust each other." I folded the note carefully and set out with a run, heart pounding with excitement and curiosity. We traveled along winding paths, past towering trees and moss-covered rocks. Orion darted ahead, exploring, sometimes flitting into the air to scout the way. I followed closely, aware of every movement, every rustle in the underbrush. The forest had become a living classroom, teaching both of us patience, vigilance, and understanding. As we reached the edge of the northern cliffs, the landscape opened into a vast valley unlike anything I had seen before. Strange rock formations jutted upward like the spires of an ancient city. The ground shimmered faintly in patches, as if dusted with starlight. Orion chirped excitedly, wings outstretched, clearly sensing something extraordinary. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the air. I looked round and noticed faint, glowing patterns etched into the cliff symbols that pulsed with soft light. Orion landed carefully in a nearby rock and began trilling in a series of melodic notes. Wings fluttering nervously, I realized he recognized the patterns, communicating in a language that transcended human understanding. We followed the glowing symbols along a narrow path that led to a hidden cave. The entrance was partially obscured by vines, but Orion's keen eye spotted a safe way through. Inside, the air was cool and filled with a faint, metallic scent. Crystals of varying colors jutted from the walls, casting reflections that danced across the cave. Orion's eyes widened in awe, and he fluttered into the center of the chamber. He sniffed the air, clicked his claws against the crystal floor, and chirped softly. I realized then that this was more than a cave. It was a repository of ancient energy, a place where dragons had long been connected to the natural and mystical forces of the forest. Suddenly, the ground trembled slightly. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike any I had seen, a massive, ethereal serpent with scales that shimmered like liquid silver and eyes that glowed a deep, sapphire blue. Orion puffed himself up, wings raised, and let out a series of sharp, confident trills. I stood frozen, and fear mingling in my chest. The serpent regarded Orion for a long moment. Then, to my astonishment, it lowered its head in acknowledgement. Orion responded with a series of melodic chirps and a graceful bow. The bond between them was unmistakable, a silent communication of respect and understanding. I realized then that Orion was no ordinary dragon. He had an innate connection to the mystical forces of the world, capable of understanding and interacting with creatures beyond my comprehension. And I, as his human companion, was being drawn into a realm of wonder and discovery far beyond the forest. As we explored deeper into the cave, following the glowing symbols and avoiding treacherous paths, I felt a surge of exhilaration. The forest and its secrets were vast. But with Orion by my side, I knew we could face whatever challenges lay ahead. When we emerged from the cave hours later, the sun was low in the sky, casting a golden light across the valley. Orion perched on my shoulder, breathing softly, wings folded neatly. I smiled down at him. Together, we had uncovered a fragment of the world's hidden magic. And I knew there were countless more secrets waiting to be discovered. That night, as we camped beneath the stars, I realized something profound. Our journey was far from over. The forest, the valleys, the cliffs, and the mysteries beyond, they were all calling us forward. And together, human and dragon, we would rise to meet them, because with trust, courage, and an unbreakable bond, there was no limit to what we could achieve.